This session today is all about supporting class, and one of the things about that is we know that in terms of supporting our pupils and students, nothing is as good as patience and understanding. But for people who've got neurodiverse conditions, you need to provide something much more practical than that. So inclusive practices will include practical ways to help the young person that you're dealing with. So let's just have a quick browse through ADHD. What is it? Some of the outward signs are listed up here. You know, the young people you're working with, they won't always have a diagnosis and they won't always have an EHCP. So sometimes you've got to just look at what you're seeing and try to adapt your approach, whether there's a diagnosis or not. We've looked at inattention here and impulsivity. Those are the features that we probably know more about. And that could be a number of reasons why a young person might have difficulties this way. But with the hyperactivity, that doesn't always suggest that it's ADHD. And in particular, the mental restlessness is the bit you can't see, but that drives the behaviour. So some of the behaviours would be moving about a lot, poor attention, not being able to stay on task long enough to finish it, wanting to move, you know, things like that in class. Now, I always say that we can all day long dress up ADHD, but when you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. So there will be some common things that you might see across the spectrum, but certainly as far as the condition is concerned, everybody is different. So, and it needs something different for each person. So in class, ADHD is going to take a lot of different types of how you might see it. So the outward signs of it could be some of these things. And I recognise that there will be people in your classes who display these kinds of behaviour that don't necessarily have ADHD. But the good news is that if you apply some of the practice that we know works for ADHD, none of your students and pupils will be disadvantaged as a result of that, okay? So we've got a few problems around thought processing, being fidgety, need to move, which can seem like someone is behaving not appropriately for the classroom. It doesn't mean that they are deliberately behaving that way. It means that there's something about the way their brain is talking to them at the moment that they need to do these things. And obviously the non-hyperactive side is ADD, the H disappears, and that might display as poor focus. So if you have poor attention, you have attention deficit, you might have a very short attention span and not able to concentrate for long periods of time. We tend to associate ADD particularly with girls because when you split, the hyperactivity is more common in boys, about 75-25 in terms of the split of the condition that way. But I think that some girls can go through the whole of their lives with a poor diagnosis because they don't display hyperactivity. And that's the thing that we all kind of associate with ADHD. When I was at school, we used to call them dolly daydreamers, but I don't think that's the very nice expression to use now. But this study done in 2007, it's available for you to read up, Spencer. This is one part of the study, and particularly as it relates to ADHD in the learning environment, because what we know is that there are impairments that impact across the lifespan. Now, if we're talking about childhood and primary school age children, some of the academic underachievement starts at that point, and often it's because there's no diagnosis, but also that the people in the room, the adults in the room with the young person, don't understand what they're seeing. So from our perspective, you need to be able to recognise some of the signs. A young person in primary school who finds it difficult to learn might then start getting poor relationships with the teacher and also with the learning environment itself. So it can start quite young if we don't get it right. Then we've got middle years, sort of adolescence, when they might be at secondary school. And this has started to sort of, it shows itself in different ways, quite apart from the hormones that would go along with teenage years. They might get a moped and start going to college then, you know, and they talk about sort of dangerous behaviour. and the low self-esteem around their learning. And there are statistics that show that people with ADHD tend to have far more negative comments made to them about their ability to learn and their prospects of success than others, than non-neurodiverse people. And in adulthood, that can result in people who have difficulty finding good employment. But there's much more to that than meets the eye. And we haven't got time to talk about that today, but ADHD does not mean that you are going to have negative consequences all your life. It could mean that you will be quite a high achiever, which is always good to know. So what we want is for these young people to flourish, and it can be quite tricky when you've got large class sizes. I've got a little picture here of a nice jaunty angle to see how you cope with jaunty angles, because not everyone likes those. But we've got a picture of a desk with chairs around it, the typical group style in class. I recognise that it's not always appropriate to seat like that in class, but the environment matters. What we know about group work particularly is you don't need to do it all the time, but it is an opportunity for groups of students to break from what they're doing and to come to a different way of learning within a group. And sometimes that's quite a positive thing. And bear that in mind when you're thinking about your own environment. But I wanted to point this out to you as well, because lots of young people I've worked with who have ADHD, they think that everyone else is succeeding. They think that everyone else just starts to learn and then becomes successful straight away. And we know that's not the case. We know that most people have a very convoluted journey from starting to finishing in life, in learning. And it's important to get that message across, that the feelings of low self-esteem will reflect on the relationship that that young person has with their learning and with you, the other member of staff in the classroom. What we know typically about attention spans is that most people are challenged paying attention for periods of time. This is not unusual. This is not new information. Lots of people have a problem. So sometimes the first bit of the session, the class, you might have a lovely starter activity. You could come into the class full of enthusiasm for what you're going to be doing, but the attention drops off very quickly. And that's for most of us. But imagine if you had a condition which actually causes you to not be able to pay attention for periods of time. Your attention is going to drop off a bit quicker and probably will stay off attention for quite some time, low attention. So most people are challenged by this to a greater or lesser degree, okay? Someone with ADHD is challenged to it in a greater degree because they need to be the stimulus to maintain high attention. So this is really what we prefer. And I know that it's so difficult to achieve. So in class, this picture here, we're talking about having little reset activities. So ways that you can kind of re-engage the brain, do something different, which would map out really nicely if you lose your focus on something. I also recognize that 10 minutes is quite difficult to achieve to get in deep with any learning. So I think we're quite optimistic to think we could do 10-minute reset activities, but some subjects will lend itself to that and others will not. But I think generally speaking, if we can try and achieve a 20-minute span before we do some kind of reset in some way, then that would probably be really helpful. And there's lots of ways you can provide reset. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, but before I launch into that, I want to show you some of these. I don't know if you've managed to adapt in this way, but this top left picture here has got like they call it a wiggle cushion, and it's got little nodules on it. So particularly youngsters who move about a lot, it sort of sends a little sensory experience to the person and they feel like re-engaged. So they're quite useful if you want to try those with any of your pupils and students. And then there's these tension bands that you can put around the legs of the chairs. And I know lots of people that like them with or without ADHD. It's just a nice way of moving and being able to operate your body in a way that's going to help you to focus on other things. So it's an opportunity to move. The fellow in the green shirt, he's lost focus. He's looking out of the window. So remember, It's not all about the extreme movement and hyperactivity. It can be about the loss of focus. We mustn't assume that it's all about needing to move. Sometimes it's just gone on to a different thought process. So try to provide a reset opportunity in a physical way. Could be around props. I love props. We need to be able to encourage movement in class. A couple of ideas here, which over the years I've used countless times. I teach business and IT, so we've got an Excel task here. Now these are cube templates, like a dice, like a big dice. So you make a cube out of it, and I'll show you how to get them from the website, but they are so easy to produce. Now they could be used as a starter activity or as a consolidation activity, or they could be used as a reset. So if you're moving from one set of your lesson or one stage of your lesson to the next stage, you could check on understanding of the bit that you've just covered. You could find out what your pupils already know about the new part of the session you're going to do. It's a really adaptable prop, and you can make them individual to your age group as well. So the one I've got here, the Control V, that would be like, okay, this is a combination keystroke. What will it do if you press those two keys together? And what you do is put your students in groups. You'd make the cube, and then someone would roll it, and whatever comes up on the top, that person has to answer that question. Now, the one on the right-hand side is kind of a maths, general maths one, but the task could be something like the jeans are £30. You roll the cube, and whatever comes up on top, you have to say how much the jeans are when you get to the checkout. I know you're all thinking, blimey, where'd you get jeans for £30? But I'm just saying you could use whatever figure you like. And it could be any type of maths thing if you're doing maths. The one on the left is punctuation. So if you were covering punctuation, you might give groups of students a piece of unpunctuated text and they have to fill it in. And at the top, I've just put a couple of dice there. And the idea around all of these is that it's a prop. It's something to do with your hands. You've created a diversion and hopefully a reset activity. So I use the dice, but there might be a list of questions I want people to answer. They roll the dice to see which question number they have to answer first. Really not difficult. We also use Scrabble pieces. That's a fantastic thing. You can get a big bag of Scrabble pieces from eBay for next to nothing. And that could be a way you could ask your students and pupils just to make a couple of keywords that relate to the lesson that they've just covered. Something like that. It's a tactile activity. Helps with spelling, embedding your numeracy and literacy. Okay. Learning materials. It's really important to recognise that there is a co-occurrence of dyslexia with ADHD, and that's because of the neurodiverse brain. It's the way that the information needs to be received. I've put these text onto a yellow background, and it does jump out at you a bit better. One of the things we always say is there's no money in education. You can't get lots of coloured paper. There'll be resistance to that. But you could certainly get some overlays. We used to buy yellow and pink and pale blue plastic wallets, you know, and then stick a sheet of paper inside that and say to the student who might be struggling, say, is that better for you? And if it is, then we'll provide you with one of those. But make sure the font size is bigger, at least size 14. If you're creating resources, make sure at least size 14 font is on there, and preferably something without any, you know, curls and twirls on the style. I think this one is Arial I've got here. Highlight and underline keywords because they jump out. You can tell that because I've highlighted a word there. They jump out far better. So when you think of people with dyslexia tendencies, the words tend to not stick out, they don't flow well. Use visual aids and props. What we know about people who need to have a dual coding chance of learning, that means provide the information in more than one method. So visuals and the words together, or props, wherever possible. And if you can, then provide the opportunity for voice recordings. And I know that's a bit easier when the students are older, but certainly we talk about not being able to write very fast. So you've got the thoughts going, you know the answers to things, you just can't write it down quick enough, or you get frustrated with the slowness of writing it down. So in this circumstance, if you could record the answer, say to the student, well, what's the answer to this? They tell you, and then you can play it back and write it down at a slower pace. It gets the thoughts down then. It's really important. Another couple of things about resources and in class. So IT opportunities, I guess homeschooling's been quite a challenge for everyone, but it has meant that people are online a bit more. As far as I'm concerned, I teach IT, so it's never a problem for me. But when I've observed classes, I see that some of the young people really enjoy learning that way, getting a chance to go online somehow. So where you can, put that in place. Checklists, there's a connection with poor memory with people with ADHD. They don't absorb information quickly, and it doesn't stay there. So working memory particularly. So encourage checklists. The older the learner, the easier it is for them to write their own checklist. And that's a study skill that we need to teach them. As they get older, if they have problems remembering what they've been asked to do, ask them to jot it down or provide a checklist and say, right, have you done that? When you've done it, tick it off. We all use lists, don't we? If we don't use lists, then we forget. I'm not keen on books for people with ADHD because I think it's a bit overwhelming. I much prefer the fact that we could take a copy of the relevant part of a book and then provide that for students to learn with or to learn from. Break everything to small parts, and that again is because smaller chunks are easier to absorb, far better. Highlighters to connect sections, so if a pink bit relates to that pink bit, then that's another learning skill. And encourage grids, and I've given an example of what that looks like, encouraging grids. If you look at this, it's exactly the same piece of text as I had on the previous slide. So that's one way of looking at the same text. And I've just put it into a table, and you can see that each section jumps out far better. I get it that you won't be able to produce these things all the time, but it's a study skill that you can teach your young people. So why not give them a pencil and a ruler and say, if you've got important things that you need to remember, then draw a box around them, if it's on a handout or something like that. It's something they can do for themselves. They don't need you to do it. It's a skill that you can teach them. And the last thing on here is with the poor memory, which I've referred to before. One of the problems with getting pupils on task in class is that they sometimes not really sure what they have to do. And what we do as the adults is we nag. We say, why are you not doing this? Come on, start. Why have you not started? La, la, la. So the first thing I like to do is ask them what they're going to do first. Because if they don't know what to do first, then they're not going to get started on their task. If they're not really sure or they feel a bit unsure about trying to explain that to you, I would ask another student and say to them, well, what are you going to do first? And then others can hear and get the chance to remember themselves what they're going to do first to get started on a task. But to be honest with you, the most critical thing you could offer is a checklist so that everybody knows what they need to do. We're in an age where there's lots of calls for people's attention from all over the place, and some people are good at that and other people are not. So if we provide this information, none of your pupils and students will be disadvantaged. Okay, so basically a bit of a summary of that is, remember that some of these behaviours really are not driven by the individual, they're driven by the condition. In class, it's a bit tricky for people with ADHD, and we need to provide something different for them. By doing that, none of your other students and pupils will be disadvantaged. They might even enjoy it as well, who knows. Make reasonable adjustment by using some props to help engage, and fidget opportunities such as the band around the chairs or tapping pens is okay. And if someone's gazing out of the window, you need to give them a reset activity, re-engage them that way. Remember that the memory isn't great. A bit of dual coding, provide some visuals with the text that you're going to provide. And that is the end of this